Good evening, and this is C from C's Listening Room. As I've said, this is not really a listening room, it's just a room. But I'm going to do our first video here. And I went into the big CD library, and this is the first album I grabbed. This is a pretty appropriate one to start out with. It's a pretty well-known album. It's a classic. This is Gin Blossoms, right? New Miserable Experience. And what really surprised me is I just looked at the back, and this has a copyright date of 1992. This is a lot older. I thought this was maybe 94, 95. This is actually 1992. I don't think I even knew about this album until about 94. 95, 96, some of the local radio stations around here were still playing these songs on a pretty regular basis. So maybe this was released in 92, but took a couple years to take off and grab hold of everyone's attention. I don't know, but I was a little surprised when I found out how old this was. But the cover here is got a reflection of the back shot. It looks like it was taken in front of some kind of a backdrop. You probably can't see it because there's too much glare, but there's like a one-dimensional photo of like some buildings. It looks like an apartment building you would see in like San Francisco. These guys are from Arizona. I've never seen a building anywhere close to Arizona that looked like that. So I think they just got some kind of backdrop, put it on the wall, and had them stand in front of it. I don't know why, but they reused that back cover shot for the front, where it's got a church van. It's kind of a rock and roll thing. I've noticed there's a couple rock albums that use vans. I think the Black Keys had an album with a van, and I had a Fluff album. Right? I've seen a Fluff album that I think had a van on it. But you open up the booklet, and here's the church van. So that seems to be kind of a semi-common theme in these kind of indie rock or alternative rock albums. And then here inside it's got a couple photo collages. It's supposed to look like it's like a film negative. So believe it or not, there are people that have probably never heard of this band. They've probably never heard this band. So I would say the packaging on it is pretty accurate. I mean, I think if somebody were to find this in a like a thrift shop, which I think is where I actually got this CD at, and they were to open it up, they'd probably have a pretty good idea of what this music sounds like. It's probably not going to be one of those albums where they buy it completely blind to the content and put it on. I mean, just this guy's got a blue jean jacket. This guy's got a really creepy clown shirt on. You can tell that these guys are probably a rock band. And then they said the image of the big church van, it looks like he's pulling a trailer with it. And then the photo collage. This is definitely not a misleading album by the packaging. I find it hard to believe that somebody would not have heard of this album by now, but considering how old it is, it probably wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility. But this is one of the classics from the 90s. And I guess you could classify this as power pop. It's got that jangly guitar sound. REM did a lot of that, especially earlier on. I think Toad the Wet Sprocket kind of did some of this. It's definitely like a 90s power pop sound. It's a little bit more of a happy and cheerful sound compared to a lot of what was going on back then. This is kind of the grunge era, and these guys really weren't trying to be depressing and down and all. This is actually a pretty upbeat and kind of happy sounding album, with the exception of Found Out About You, which ironically is actually my favorite song on the album. Actually one of my favorite songs, period. It's actually kind of a little dark and unsettling, and the rest of the album is a little kind of bright and happy. And that song is a little more dark. And kind of helped it fit in with what other people were doing at that time, but I think it's actually also one of the best recorded songs on the album. Found Out About You, it's track number 8. And I've loved that song ever since I first heard it. It's just the guitar work and that bass line, that 1, 2, 3, very prominent do 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 bass line. I was listening to it today, and I've never noticed, first of all, how many guitar tracks were on that song. It's very subtle. There's a lot of like guitar dubs in there, probably 3 or 4 guitar tracks, little fills here and there that they were all kind of recorded on there in such a way that you don't really notice it unless you're listening really carefully. So there's a lot of work went into the song, but they don't flaunt how great they are musically. They don't really push how meticulous their recording was. They just kind of leave it in the background and kind of want to see if you can pick up on it or not. But I never noticed until today that there's a kind of quiet guitar track that mimics the bass line. I've always heard the bass line do 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 do, and there's a guitar. It's like din 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 din. I've never noticed that. So that's the cool thing. It's one of those songs where it's not really super complicated at first listen, but you can listen to it 20 or 25 years later, still enjoy it, and you will pick up new little details about the song that you really didn't know were there. Hey Jealousy, song number 2, one of the biggest hits on the album. I think that might have been the first song that I've ever heard off this album. I remember that it was on either MTV or VH1. I think that's where I really first had even heard of this band. Until I Fall Away, track number 4. That was another really, really big one. And then Allison Road. It was either Allison Road or Hey Jealousy. It's one of those two that first opened my eyes to this band. And both those songs, I'm like, they're okay. I would say a couple decades later, they're a lot better than I thought they were. Maybe my taste has changed. Maybe it's nostalgia. I don't know. But I think seeing where music has gone and where popular music has gone, and common themes and just how the music sounds, they sound a little bit better. I think the music just as a whole is a little more uplifting than it was before. I think if I had bought this album in the 90s, I would have found it to be kind of boring. Now that I'm older, I actually like it a lot better than I would have had this been a new release when I bought it. Track 6, Cajun Song, is probably one of the most memorable on the album because it's the only one that has an accordion. There's a little bit of that kind of country blues sound. I kind of think of Better Than Ezra, because I bought that album not too long after it came out, and the deluxe album. And there's a lot of stuff on there that really kind of surprised me. I thought it was just going to be a straightforward rock album, and it was actually a lot more country than I thought. And it kind of took some getting used to. I still don't know what I think about that album, but it was not the rock album that you would have thought it was from the two big songs that were being played at the time on the airwaves. This song reminds me of something that would have been more expected from the Better Than Ezra deluxe album than from the Gin Blossoms. That was probably the most interesting song. And then the last song on the album, it's track 12, Cheatin'. That is pretty much a country song, or some form of a country song, Western music or whatever. Those two really stand out because they completely go in a new direction. I really wanted to give this probably a 4. I don't think there's a bad song on the album. With this album, if you like one song, you're probably going to like the entire album. And I like it more now than I would have in the 90s. So I probably bought it at a better time in my life to appreciate it. As I said, you could listen to this a couple of times and you'll still pick up little details, little chiming guitar parts here and there that you never noticed. They were just kind of hidden throughout. Little things like that probably most listeners would never even listen closely enough to pick up on. But this is the big but. Most of these songs all kind of sound the same. Yes, if you like one, you're going to like them all. But there are little guitar parts, little rhythms and stuff that sound like they were taken from about 3 other songs or used in about 3 other songs on the album. They might have, there might be a couple little tempo changes or chord changes kind of here and there. Bass lines seem to be a little bit similar. As I said, Found Out About You is it's the best song in my opinion. It's my favorite it's one of my favorite songs, period. But some of the lesser known tracks on this album have some guitar parts that sound a little bit too similar. I think it's 29, track 10, that has a bass line that really seems a little too similar as well. So it's a pretty good listen. It's a good album to listen to. I think it sounds better. It's a lot more enjoyable now than probably even when it was new. It's probably one of the happier albums of that time period. But it's kind of spinning its tires in the mud because the songs are a little too similar. And I think casual listeners or people who aren't really sure if they like the album or not, they're probably not going to stick around and finish it. They're probably not going to listen to all 12 tracks. There are just a little too many similarities between the songs, and I think they had it in them to do better. I think they probably could have branched out, and I think they could have been more versatile than this album showed. But too many songs are almost carbon copies of better ones. That's quite disappointing to me for a band that's as obviously talented as they are. Songwriting isn't bad. I find the vocals to be pretty easy to take. I think the guitar work is pretty impressive. They're obviously very skilled musicians. They're obviously good at what they do. So it just disappoints me that there's such a lack of versatility and they keep repeating too many of the same textures and formulas song after song after song. So it's going to be a little hard to give a grade to. The consistency of the album, quality-wise, should make it a 4. But since it runs out of surprises halfway through and it just seems like they're recycling too many of their tricks, I'm going to give this a 3.5 out of 5. And that's not a bad grade, but the potential is there to make this a solid 4. It's disappointing that something this consistently enjoyable starts to show some flaws when you listen carefully. So I'm a little disappointed because this really is a classic album. This is a classic. This is actually I think the style holds up very well, but every track on this album holds up on its own. On its own merits, they're all good songs. But when you listen to it beginning to end as an album, it gets a little too repetitive, and that disappoints me. So it's a 3.5, but as I said, with a caveat. So that's Gin Blossoms for you. And what can I say? It's a 3.5 out of 5. Still a classic. And I think I'm going to hold on to this one. I think I'll keep this one in my library for a while. I'll catch you in the next video. Thanks.